Our first presenter is Tammy Everts. Tammy is working at SpeedCurve. She is a pillar in this community. She has been doing amazing web performance work forever. I feel like I have been learning from her since literally day zero getting into this community. She's also one of the kindest people I've ever met, not within the community, just in general. She is absolutely fantastic. A fun fact about her is that she's known as the Britney Spears of Nelson, apparently. And as soon as you watch, there's some wonderful photos that happen during the event. And as soon as you start going through the photos, you'll find out why, I feel like, because every year there's at least 1 or 2 photos where Tammy's and it looks like she's singing on stage, and bringing us all in there. So I'm looking forward to those every year. It's an annual tradition. But yeah, please welcome Tammy.
Thank you, everyone. Oh my goodness, it's very bright. I'm here we're trying something new this year at perf.now, where we're starting each day with a keynote to kind of prime the pump for what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of days. So this is going to be kind of a blazing fast tour of the current performance landscape. And if you need to reach me, these are the places where I live online. You can find me there and ask me questions, and I'll also be at the Google Help Desk during the break. There's not going to be a Q&A after my talk. So if you want to come and chat with me, you can find me in the hallways, or you can find me at the Google Help Desk. I wrote a book called Time is Money a little while ago that was published by O'Reilly, which is kind of about the intersection of business and user experience and web performance. And I also curate, really Tim does most of the heavy lifting, but I curate WPO Stats, which is a repository of web performance case studies where people submit, and you can submit your own case study if you have one, of how making performance changes actually affected your business in some really measurable way. And I also maintain a web performance guide. So if you're new to performance, or you work with people who are new to performance and you want to help them get started, this is where you can find that. And it's just kind of hopefully a helpful set of articles, very user-friendly, written by real people, real intelligence, not artificial intelligence, to kind of just give you a bit of a guided tour through some just fundamental concepts. And I also maintain the industry benchmarks, which is a public-facing set of dashboards that anybody can check out and see how some leading sites, global sites, perform across a bunch of different industries and a lot of different metrics like Start Render and Core Web Vitals and things like that. So I will be talking a little bit more about those later on. And so back home, my friends do sometimes, when they see pictures of me doing these kinds of talks, have called me Britney Spears. But I've been referred to on this stage and other stages as performance mom. You don't have to call me performance mom, that's okay. If you do call me performance mom, I am going to expect a card or a phone call on Mother's Day, so just keep that in mind. Let's kind of jump right in. So probably you don't recognize these two gentlemen. They are David Dunning and Justin Kruger. And they basically did a lot of research and published about something that we now call the Dunning-Kruger effect, way back in 1999. So the Dunning-Kruger effect has its 25th anniversary this year. Show of hands, who's familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect? Okay, so a lot of people, not everyone. So what the Dunning-Kruger effect is a really interesting cognitive bias in which people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities, and people who are more high-performing in their domain tend to underestimate their abilities. So it's really interesting. When I first heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect, I was like, oh, that explains so much about other people. I didn't apply it to myself. But the interesting thing about Dunning-Kruger, this effect, is that you don't know where you are in the spectrum. Are you that high-performing person who underestimates their abilities, or are you the person who's like, yeah, I totally get this concept? The world that we live in today really kind of challenges us to think about the Dunning-Kruger effect a lot. I know I do. A good way to know kind of where you are with this effect is where you sit in this timeline. So back here in this corner, where competence is low, you don't know anything, but it jumps up really quickly to high, is when you start to have a little bit of information and you think that that information that you have is adequate. You have a very competent understanding of the entire landscape of whatever you're looking at. And then the more you know, you kind of hit this valley of despair. I've certainly hit the valley of despair many, many times with anything that I've tried to become better at. But then once you've learned a little bit more, you start to feel yourself go up the slope of enlightenment towards the plateau of sustainability. I didn't come up with any of these terms. The word guru kind of came with this graphic. Please don't ever use that word if you can help it, with regard to yourself or anyone else. But definitely being on the upward slope of having a sustainable, constantly evolving bit of knowledge is a really good thing. So in other words, we don't know what we don't know. And it's really easy when you say it like that, but it's actually a real challenge in our day-to-day lives when we're trying to be competent at whatever it is that we want to do. So when we talk about performance and I talk about exploring the landscape of web performance, it's easy to kind of think like, well, yes, I've got my map and I've got my compass and I totally know what I'm doing. But really, the longer I've been in this space, and I've been working in performance for about 15 years, it's really more like terra incognita, here be dragons, what the heck's around that corner, and that's okay. To work in any nuanced field, you just need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and get comfortable with asking questions and get comfortable with exploring what you don't know. Way back in 2007, Steve Souders, who I'm lucky enough to work with at SpeedCurve, he published this book, High Performance Websites. So it was 14 rules, best practices for accelerating your pages. And it's a great book. Still a lot of good, helpful stuff in it. It's kind of the Bible of our industry and really kind of catapulted our industry. But 2007 was a very different time in our world. There were very few metrics. We mostly focused on using synthetic testing tools. RUM didn't really exist yet in any kind of broadly applicable way. We had very limited understanding of real users. Pages were very small, very simple relative to pages today, and contained very few, if any, third-party scripts. So it was a different time. So fast forward 18 years, we know so much more. Our tools have evolved, our understanding of users has evolved, our metrics have evolved, and yet still there are huge, significant gaps in what we know about our users, their devices, their browsers, our metrics, our teams, our pages, and importantly, the effectiveness of the optimizations that we use. So let's kind of start with talking about users. There are 5.52 billion people worldwide who use the internet. And my brain actually kind of glitches out when I think about a room with kind of more people in it than this. When I tried to visualize what 5.52 billion people are, that's like about 2/3 of the population of this planet. When I tried to visualize it and I tried to create a compelling visual of what that was, because I wanted to kind of really get the impact of that kind of across to an audience and to myself, I did this. It's like I was like, okay, that's a lot of people. I don't understand what 5.52 billion people are doing or thinking and how they use the internet. I really don't. I don't understand why people do this at concerts. So I certainly don't understand the world at large. And I would like to. My background's in user experience. I love observing people in lab settings and really understanding how it is people use the web. And it's kind of something I've had to accept that I just am never going to know what all of them are doing and thinking and feeling about how they use our pages. There's so many ways to use the web, so I'm going to kind of just info dump at you for a little bit, so just be ready. You don't have to memorize any of this stuff. There's not going to be a test later, I promise. So worldwide, 71.1% of web users use Android devices. That's a pretty significant chunk of the population. But that leaps whenever you think about countries like India, where over 95% of the population use Android devices. And when you actually look at the data, this all comes from StatCounter, Global Stats. This is the most recent October data. When you actually break it down by country, what I discovered, and this was very interesting to me, was that most countries, Android users are actually the dominant group. Very, very, very few countries have Apple's users as the dominant group. In fact, I'm Canadian. I was very surprised to find out that Canada leads the world in Apple usage, so with just about 60% of our population. And what's interesting, though, is that so many people, so many developers, so many companies develop with iPhone first as a mentality. So I'm not going to get you to do a show of hands, but I would reckon that many people in this group, when you're developing, you're thinking, okay, how is my app, how is my site perform for iPhone users? Alex Russell has written a lot of really interesting things about the performance equality gap or the performance inequality gap, and he made a really interesting point. I don't know if you can see, you can see it. There's a link to his collection of performance inequality articles, and he's going to be talking again at this conference. You can talk to him more about this if you're interested. But basically, iPhones equal inequality. So the I in iPhone stands for inequality. And what Alex has said is the performance gap between wealthy users and budget shoppers grew more this year than the gains from improved chips delivered at the low end. So in other words, inequality amongst device users is growing faster than the bottom end can improve. And Annie Sullivan, who you're also going to hear from during this event, recently shared on Blue Sky some really compelling maps that show LCP and INP performance in 2022 versus 2024 globally. And so all of the redder, kind of hotter areas indicate where LCP and INP are kind of in the poor performance sort of segment cohort. And on the left, you see 2022. On the right, you see 2024. And what's interesting is there has been improvement, but you can still see that there are considerable gaps, particularly in Africa, India, and some other countries. In terms of connectivity, this is another map that comes from World Population Review. And the blue is good. Yellow and green are not good. You can see that a significant chunk of the world, and these are highly populous parts of our world, have download speeds of 50 megabits per second or less. So if you are designing or you believe you're designing for a global audience, this is something that's really important for you to keep in mind from a performance perspective and from a lot of other perspectives. So moving right along, I told you this was going to be a whirlwind tour. We have so many metrics, so many metrics. I pull out some version of this slide every year. This is just a smattering of the many metrics that we can capture on synthetic and real user monitoring. At Speed Curve, we capture more than 50 synthetic metrics, 25 metrics per third party on top of those synthetic metrics, more than 30 run metrics, and then countless custom metrics that people create. So that's a lot of metrics. It's very overwhelming for a lot of people who are trying to tackle performance for the first time and kind of think about and measure performance. So the flip side is like maybe there's too few metrics, and we're going to talk more about Core Web Vitals throughout this conference. It comes up every year. But Google came up with a solution to address the too many metrics conundrum. And that was to come up with 3 metrics, largest contentful paint, cumulative layout shift, and interaction to next paint that have specified thresholds so that you're meant to aim for. And they're meant to kind of just help you to approach the ideas of interactivity, how quickly does the user perceive the page to render, and how quickly the page responds to any kind of interaction, and how janky the page feels. So that's really great, and it's been a really fantastic set of metrics for galvanizing people to care about performance, to kind of set aside some of the frustration and intimidation that can come whenever you're looking at dozens and dozens of metrics in your charts, and to kind of get people outside of kind of dev and engineering to kind of care about performance. So hat tip to Core Web Vitals for that. However, the caveats are that none of these metrics have 100% browser adoption, and they're not all supported in SPAs. So for example, cumulative layout shift is only available in Chrome. It's not available in Safari or Firefox, and the other metrics are not available in Safari at all. So to kind of break this down for you again, more charts, more maps, about 66% of the population, about 2/3 of the Earth that uses the web, uses Chrome. About 18% uses Safari. And you might think, oh, 18%, that's, but when you think about that, that's about 1 out of 5 of your users. Do you really want to have no visibility into performance for 1 out of 5 of your users? I wouldn't. And to kind of cap that off, unfortunately, the Google Core Web Vitals thresholds are based on aggregated data. That's really helpful, and it's a good starting point. But when you look at data from site to site, there's actually no consistent correlation within individual sites between Google's thresholds for good, needs improvement, and poor. So what that looks like is, here's a set of correlation charts which show you the correlations between the INP, interaction in XPaint, and conversion rate. And you can see that, oh, sorry, it's page views, it's bounce rate. Oh, sorry, it is conversion rate. My bad. So what you can see here is that according to Google, your threshold is 200 milliseconds. Your INP should be below 200 milliseconds. But when we actually look at 4 individual sites, and Cliff Crocker, who I work with at SpeedCurve, he was the one who did this exploration, and you can see the blog post that he wrote about it, where, yes, there was typically a correlation between INP performance and conversion rate, but the point at which conversion started to suffer varied from site to site. So from 100 milliseconds all the way up to 600 milliseconds. So again, the Google thresholds are great, but they might not be great for your particular site. So to recap, we mostly build for iOS. We mostly monitor for Chrome. Popular metrics don't capture Safari, and our goals might be wrong. So this is where we are right here. The other thing that I like to look at every year is just how page growth is proceeding. Pages are always getting bigger. I've been looking at this type of data for over 10 years now. Currently, we're looking at pages that are almost 3 megs in size, and this is looking at the top 1,000,000 sites according to the HTTP archive, which is a publicly available archive that you are very, very encouraged to go and check out yourself. It's full of really helpful data. This is just the page size data. And you can see that from 2022 to 2024, there's been a significant amount of growth. Where's this growth happening? If you break it out by resource type, you can see that this red bit is video. And you can see the amount of video has just exploded in the past 2 years. And it looks less impressive next to the video, but you can also see that JavaScript has really exploded as well. And what that looks like is a little bit like this. So the median JavaScript size is 806 kilobytes, and there are 26 scripts per page. Keeping in mind, this is a median. I look at a lot of waterfalls and data for specific sites, and I'm not going to call out where I pulled this chart, but this is a site that had 320 third-party requests. I will say it was a media site, and media sites seem to really suffer from this problem with third parties just proliferating on their pages. But looking at medians is interesting, but looking at kind of 90th percentiles and 95th percentiles is also really helpful. So on this particular page, we're looking at over 2 megs of third-party JavaScript. That's a lot. I like to look at median versus 90th percentile. So again, you can see the range is vast. And you can see again where a lot of this is coming from JavaScript, a lot of it's coming from video again. And you can see kind of a bigger breakdown across the median versus 90th percentile, where image requests and the number of requests is huge. JavaScript requests, we're looking at like 43 requests at the 90th percentile. So it's just a lot. And we're still making the same optimization mistakes. And I'm using the royal we here. Maybe you're not. When I recently looked at the industry benchmarks dashboard that I help maintain, I took randomly 20 leading websites. And these are, I'm not going to name them, I would never do that, but these are popular sites that you've probably heard of, and I looked at their Lighthouse audits and to see if they got pass or fail on various audits. And I found a lot of interesting things. For example, 19 out of 20 pages had an inefficient cache policy. 17 out of 20 pages had unused JS. That's a lot. 16 out of 20 did not enable BF cache restoration. 14 out of 20 don't have height and width attributes, which means that they're setting themselves up for a poor CLS score. And this kind of surprised me. It was only 2 out of the 20, but I was really surprised that 10% of the sites that I looked at in this random sampling lazy loaded their LCP image. That was very, very surprising. So moving on to the next bit of bummer news. Performance and accessibility, ideally they should be a Venn diagram that overlaps. Currently, there's virtually no overlap in the way that most of us approach performance and how we think about accessibility. And when you think about it, accessibility is just as vital as site speed. One bit of, this surprised me, was that 96.3% of pages had web content accessibility guideline failures. So that was very staggering. I expected it to be the majority. I kind of went into it with my eyes open, but that was very surprising. So why? Why are these mistakes happening, or why are these failures of optimizations happening? Well, maybe the person who is responsible for doing the various optimizations, maybe none of the optimizations would have affected anything in the critical rendering path. So maybe they wouldn't have actually helped perceived performance. I kind of doubt that because I looked at the waterfalls for quite a few of these sites, and there was room for improvement. Maybe the optimizations were hard or even impossible to implement. That's certainly true in a lot of cases. Or maybe people simply just didn't know. They didn't know that their site was, or their pages were failing on some of these optimizations. So there's a lot of maybes there. I don't know the answers. So yeah. So at this point, I don't know. I feel like if I was going to be the world's best performance mom, I would leave you on a high note, but I don't know. Maybe not the world's best performance mom. There's a lot to learn from, and there's a lot of room for improvement. Big deep breath. That's what this conference is for. I'm kind of here to set the stage for the rest of the talks and all of the experts that are in the room who are going to go deeper on a lot of the subjects that I've just talked about. If you're kind of feeling like you're in the valley of despair now, that's okay. It's good to acknowledge where we're at so that we can kind of start moving upward and onward. And just remind yourself, I love 3-letter acronyms, TLAs, as Nick Jansma, who's here, coined this term a few years ago. ABA, always be asking. Who am I building for? Who am I testing for? Do I know what's on my pages and its impact? Am I doing the right optimizations? Am I tracking the right metrics? Should I be using custom metrics? And when my pages get faster, does it actually help? Does it measurably help my users and my business? These are questions you should be asking yourself constantly. So moving right along, the hopeful news is room to learn, I think, is a good thing. Room to learn means that there's opportunity to make an impact. If your pages were already fast and performant, you would come to an event like this and you would go back to your workplaces and you would have a hard time justifying to your bosses why you need to come to events like this. But coming away with really helpful tips and making things better is a way to kind of grab that low-hanging fruit, make impact, and hopefully get to come again next year. So thank you very much.